Good afternoon. Please welcome to the stage Columbus City Council member Shayla Faber.
Good afternoon. Okay, we're going to start over. DJ, let's run it again. No, I'm joking. Good afternoon. And thank you all for being here today. It's both an honor and a privilege to welcome you to this important summit on behalf of the Community Shelter Board of Columbus and Franklin County. We have some elected officials that have joined us this afternoon, and it is a privilege to be able to introduce them. As I say their names, I'm going to ask you to hold your applause to the end, but we want to make sure that we thank these folks that are fighting on behalf of every single resident in this community, especially as it relates to addressing housing. Ohio Speaker of the House, Jason Stevens, County Commissioner Kevin Boyce, Ohio House Minority Leader Allison Rousseau, Ohio House Minority Whip Dontavius Geralds, County Recorder Danny O'Connor, Councilmember Rob Dorns, and Senator Kuzy. If you all could stand so you can be greeted. Thank you for your service to our community. And so we gather at such a crucial time, united by our shared mission to address homelessness and create sustainable solutions for those most in need. Housing is a human right, period. The timing of this assessment is critical. And as we look around our community, we see the growing pressures and challenges that have made it necessary to reassess our strategies and renew our commitment to ensuring everyone has a place to call home. Economic shifts, rising house costs, the ongoing effects of the pandemic, and other social factors have all converged, making it clear that we need to take stock of where we stand. We can no longer rely on old data and past assumptions. By conducting this comprehensive evaluation, we're ensuring that our decisions are based on the most up-to-date realities facing our neighbors who are struggling without stable housing. This moment presents both a challenge and an opportunity, a chance to confront our region's escalating housing and homelessness crisis with clarity and to innovate in ways that truly reflect the current needs of our community. Here in Columbus, the situation is clear. The recent rise in housing costs has made affordable housing harder to find, with rent increasing, outpacing wages, pushing more people to the brink. Our shelters are at capacity, and while we've made progress, the scope of the issues continue to grow. The most recent point-in-time count identified 2,380 people experiencing homelessness in Columbus and Franklin County. That's up from 1.8% from 2023. These numbers remind us why this moment truly matters, why we can't afford to delay action any longer. This assessment was about looking at the whole picture and understanding the complexities of the issue so we can make targeted, effective changes that improve outcomes for those who are experiencing homelessness. I'm eager to dive into the findings and, more importantly, to hear your ideas how we can translate this knowledge into meaningful action. These results are not just statistics. They represent the lived experiences of real people in our community, each one deserving of safety, of dignity, and a place to call home. And let's be clear, this isn't just a problem for a few organizations or a few institutions to solve. This is not an issue that one organization or one group can solve. We are the solution. And as a community, it is our collective responsibility to ensure that no one is left behind. By working together, nonprofits, government agencies, businesses, and residents alike, we can tackle the root causes of homelessness and bring about lasting change. It's through collaboration and shared commitment that will create a future where everyone has a safe, stable place to live. Thank you again for your dedication, for your compassion, and your commitment to this vital work. I look forward to meaningful conversations and action that will come from this summit. Together, we will continue to move toward a brighter, a more equitable future for all. And as we begin today's summit, you're going to hear from experts, advocates, and members of our community. We will review the assessment's results in detail, discuss current initiatives, and most importantly, work together to shape our next steps. There will be opportunities to collaborate, opportunities to ask questions, and engage in meaningful dialogue throughout the day. And so I encourage you to stay present, to share your insights, and to take this time to connect with one another as we work toward a common goal. I would now like to thank our speaker, Ohio House Speaker Jason Stephens. Are you in the room? Please welcome Jason Stephens.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Shayla. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. I also want to recognize Council President Shannon Hardin, who is here today, so we want to make sure to thank him for being here. You know, it's really exciting to come together to learn more about an issue that impacts all of our communities, actually, and especially and specifically today, how it affects Columbus and Franklin County. This summit is an important opportunity to not only be educated, but also as a call to action. By humanizing homelessness, we have an opportunity to get ahead of it before it's too late. Homelessness is a crisis that affects every corner of our state, not just our biggest cities like Columbus. You may not know this, but I served on our community action organization in the city of Ironton in Lawrence County for over 18 years. And one of our priorities there was to address homelessness. And you know, dealing with that issue is important for all of our communities. And I think this is where it's going to be very important for this group as you're able to lead the way for the rest of Ohio as we deal with homelessness across our state. My time on that board taught me that even though Lawrence County and Franklin County may be worlds apart, our goals are still the same: finding real, lasting solutions that address the root causes of homelessness, protecting our most vulnerable citizens, and preventing a permanent class of homelessness from taking hold in our communities. That's why today it is so important. We all bring different experiences, perspectives, and levels of understanding to the table, and we share a commitment to finding solutions. While there may be many different paths, hopefully today we can create one that will lead to a more hopeful future for all of us. Thank you again for having me here today. There is a lot of work to do, and I look forward to partnering with each of you as we tackle one of the most significant challenges facing our communities. Thank you very much. Shayla?
Please give another round of applause for our Ohio House Speaker, Jason Stephens. We're now going to take this opportunity to go into the current results, the current state of homelessness. And it is now my absolute pleasure to introduce a dear friend and a housing advocate to the core, Mr. Michael Wilkos, who serves as the COC Board Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Favor, and good afternoon. Let's give one more round of applause for our Councilmember Shayla Favor and her long-standing advocacy for housing. Thank you. It is my responsibility here this afternoon to explain to you what a continuum of care is and set the stage for what this moment is for our city. What is a continuum of care? It is a group of stakeholders working to end homelessness through a coordinated community collaboration. What does that mean? It means the federal government through HUD has created this program designed for a geographic area, and for us, that is all of Franklin County. The federal government invests in homelessness in our community through what is referred to as a Unified Funding Agency, or a UFA, a special status that allows one agency, and in our community, that is the Community Shelter Board, to centralize financial management for HUD Continuum of Care programs. This means one organization handles all HUD funds, then distributes them to local partners delivering services. It streamlines funding, reduces administrative burden on partners, and lets us get better oversight. Our service partners can then therefore focus on housing people, while it's the UFA that focuses on accounting, administration, and getting funding from HUD. In our arrangement, HUD monitors CSB, and CSB monitors each subrecipient agency. So smaller agencies that may struggle with managing grants benefit because CSB, our UFA, takes on the bulk of the financial and administrative responsibilities, and then therefore more money can go directly into services. The crisis response system is a coordinated approach to prevent and address homelessness by connecting people to services they need when they need them and quickly moving them from homelessness to stable housing. Let me take a moment to just clarify a few of these things. Homelessness prevention services are aimed at preventing people from becoming homeless in the first place, like rental assistance and mediation. Diversion, it helps people find alternatives to entering the shelter system, so short-term stays with family or friends. The emergency shelters provide the temporary housing for those who have no other options while they seek housing. Rapid rehousing provides the short-term rental assistance and supportive services designed to help quickly exit homelessness. And permanent supportive housing is long-term housing solutions for individuals experiencing chronic homelessness paired with ongoing supportive services. COC funding can actually only be used for those areas that have the star. CSB funds the other program types, but secures federal, state, local, and private resources to do that beyond the COC. However, it is the COC's governing body that coordinates the entire system, regardless of whether the money comes through the COC or not. This is what an optimized crisis response system looks like. And you don't need to read the boxes to get the point. It's complicated. It's a highly coordinated, efficient system that ensures everyone experiencing homelessness receives the right support at the right time and moves swiftly into permanent housing. It operates with clear goals, a defined process, and real-time data, allowing us to respond effectively and reduce the length of homelessness. It is a complicated system, and it requires cross-sector collaboration, but the ultimate end goal is that every individual or family experiencing homelessness obtains permanent housing. The outcomes of an optimized crisis response system is that homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring. And an optimized crisis response system is important to achieve efficiency, speed, and tailored assistance to reduce gaps and overlaps in service, quickly connecting people to housing and understanding that everyone's needs are different, whether through prevention, rapid rehousing, or long-term support. The homelessness crisis response system is powered by collaborations between government, nonprofits, housing providers, and service organizations to ensure that all parts of the system work together and there is the right mix of services available at the right time. So what does it mean to actually coordinate a homeless crisis response system? Well, HUD expects COCs to have numerous responsibilities, including that we coordinate local efforts to end homelessness, develop a comprehensive action plan, operate a coordinated entry system that ensures a fair, streamlined, and accessible process for people experiencing homelessness, implement a housing-first approach, meet performance benchmarks to ensure that all of the programs that we fund are effective and that we carefully allocate funding to programs that demonstrate high performance and effective outcomes. In addition to all of that, HUD expects a focus on equity, ensuring that people of all races, ethnicities, genders, and backgrounds receive fair access to housing and services, and to use data to assess those disparities. These responsibilities require us to strategically use resources, implement best practices, and foster collaboration across those sectors. So who gets to serve on this continuum of care? The board is comprised of 11 individuals, essentially local funders of our homeless response system. The full continuum of care represents a very broad and intentional group of people. Nonprofit providers, victim service organizations, faith-based organizations, businesses, street outreach, advocates, human trafficking, youth homelessness, public housing authorities, mental health and substance abuse, hospitals, school administrators, disability service providers, corporate sector, social service agencies, and universities. And it goes on to include affordable housing developers, local jails, people who've experienced homelessness, veterans organizations, youth advocates, LGBTQ service organizations, and law enforcement. It's a big group. And it's a diverse group, because the theory is any group of people is always going to be more effective than the smartest individual in that group. And so for us, what is a COC? It is comprised of 44 representatives from those cross-sector agencies I just shared, an incredible group of people working together to end homelessness. But decisions about funding, administration, and planning are done by the COC board that essentially serves as that executive committee. And as stated earlier, it is Community Shelter Board that serves as our unified funding agency. And by the way, CSB was the first UFA in the United States. So this is what's at stake when all those systems providers are not working together. In the case of Los Angeles, 73,000 people sleep outside on streets and sidewalks every single night. In Hawaii, the state legislatures made camps like this legal settlements, as they don't know what to do in that state with the explosion of homelessness. In Portland, more than 1,000 camps have been identified around that city, and the state of Oregon has the second highest per capita homelessness rate in the country. And in Denver, constant community dialogue, debate, and controversy over the explosion of camps in that city. In Columbus, we have them. They just haven't been as visible in our city. Why? Because this is what a healthy community's continuum of housing should look like. From emergency shelters at one end to home ownership at the other, and in between lies a variety of housing types that serve people as they move through that cycle. And for those of us that are concerned about the low and moderate income residents of our community, which 39% of Franklin County struggles to make ends meet, What's really happening is there is a shortage of housing throughout this continuum. But that shortage of housing is impacting low and moderate income people in far more dramatic ways than it's impacting the rest of us. How has that manifested in local homelessness? A year and a half ago, when we did that homeless point-in-time count in January of 23, there was a 46% increase in the number of people who were living unsheltered. And in January of this year, that report reported another 3% increase. Overall for homelessness, a year ago January was a 22% increase. That continued to increase this year on top of these record numbers. So while the current point-in-time count might show single-digit increases, that's on top of this record. When we look at what it costs our community to rehouse a family, that has skyrocketed over the years. We, for year after year, were rehousing families in 19 days, 20 days, 21 days. Then it jumped to 35, and we thought that was a statistical anomaly. Then it jumped to 52 days, then to 80, then to 85. And that's where we ended last year. Interestingly enough, we saw that cost drop last year, which on the surface may look good. The only reason why our cost dropped, because the system and its providers have been consistently running at full capacity, we started to achieve an economy of scale. That's an efficiency I don't think we should brag about. We all know this in this room, that we are chronically underbuilding housing. For the last decade, we were building 9,000 units of housing every single year, but we needed 14,000 units to accommodate our growth. And then we saw construction of housing surge in 20, 21, and 22. And by 22, we delivered the most amount of housing in 18 years. But now the demographers and researchers and real estate analysts are saying we now need to build 19 to 21,000 units to make up for the chronic underbuilding of the last decade. And then construction fell last year. Land, lumber, labor, and interest rates really killed the Columbus market. So far in 24, we're seeing even fewer units delivered to the market than last year. What does this mean for our region? As recently as 2010, we had 107 housing units for every 100 households, a relatively good housing market with a variety of units available by price and tenure. By 2020, we got to here. And this is why the conversation has really moved from affordable housing to housing affordability, which is impacting all of us. Why? Because there's very little wiggle room in the market. There's very little in the market sitting available. If we do not change our behavior around the construction of housing, we are on track to be here by 2030. I don't think we know what a rough housing market will look like. Denver, Los Angeles, Portland, Hawaii, they're already below the 100 mark. That's why they are overwhelmed by homelessness. And while housing construction fell, it fell even faster for multifamily last year. And one study saw that the highest increase in rents in the country was New York City, followed by Northern New Jersey. Columbus ended last year in third place for the fastest increasing rents. That is causing a system that is collapsing. And the eviction numbers continue to go up significantly from 21 to 22 to 23. But if you go to the far right of the slide, what we're really most concerned about are how many people are being set out because they were unable to solve their housing vulnerability. And in 2022, with just 744 set-outs, with 21,000 eviction filings, that was the lowest ratio of set-outs in Columbus history because of the resources our community has received to keep people stable. As we look at the numbers for this year, just comparing the January through September 30th of each of those years, we are ahead of last year's trajectory and on track to have the largest number of evictions in history. When we look at the geography of those evictions, something very interesting reveals itself. It's not the urban core of Linden, the Near East Side, or Franklinton. The eviction epidemic is further out. It's now in southwestern city schools and Whitehall schools. Reynoldsburg is a massive epicenter of evictions. And in the north end, in Northland, heading into the Westerville School District, there's simply not enough housing. Coupled with that, we're starting to see where government is having to intervene into the private sector because multiple properties have such deplorable conditions. Government has to take those properties over. That was a loss of 1,250 units of affordable housing just in those 3 properties. And then we have what's called renovictions. The market is so tight, the city is growing so quickly, the long-term forecasts are so strong, people are looking in these neighborhoods where those apartments built in the 1960s, 1970s, small rooms, small closets, architecture that I will describe as unworthy of human affection. It's very utilitarian. Well, now even that product has a great value in the marketplace. So developers are purchasing entire apartment complexes and either eliminating those leases or waiting for everybody to cycle off so they can renovate the entire apartment complex. It's putting some of the most vulnerable households in some of the most vulnerable neighborhoods at risk in ways we've never seen. We all see it. Sometimes it's dramatic, like the fire in the homeless camp under the 3rd Street Viaduct, the controversy in Heer Park, in Wineland Park. All over the city, it's creeping up on us. Sometimes you look away. Sometimes maybe provide help. As I walk down High Street, this is not the city I'm proud to live in. It's creeped up on me so much, you see it on the bike trails, right? Or this camp in the shadows of the new White Castle headquarters. And it's even snuck up on me 5 doors down from my house. Have I already gotten numb to it? Some days I think I have. In December of last year, we gathered to honor the 93 people who died in our city last year while experiencing homelessness, to acknowledge the struggles of their life, to have lived in a city that did not deliver on the promise of a safe, decent, affordable housing unit. And yet, despite the evidence that is all around us, too often, this is the word that we hear. And it's the word that is said at almost every neighborhood meeting anytime anyone wants to build anything. If you can read this slide, you'll see all of the reasons why people have come up with why they can say no. It's too tall, it's too big, it's too dense, it's going to cause too much traffic. It's fill in the blank. But as we contemplate this moment in time, many of us were here in this room just a couple weeks ago to see a documentary film on national homelessness. And there was this line that stopped me in my mental tracks. And that is, if we don't want affordable housing in your backyard, you will have homeless in your front yard. We have a decision to make in this city of what that future should look like. We are nowhere near the crisis of West Coast cities that are probably beyond the point of no return. And with that, it is my honor and privilege to introduce Shannon Isom, President and CEO of the Community Shelter Board, who, along with Focus Strategies, is going to share with you what the plan is moving forward so we can avoid the outcome of so many other large growing cities in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I have to pause and say that that was a lot of information to take in, hard information to take in. But what this next hour will bring us is what I have been clear about since the day that I walked into this city and took this role, is we have the ability of collaboration and partnership. From the city administration to the council, all the way to the commissioners to the partnership, and you heard it with a hello from the State House. We can get this done. Yes. So with that, good afternoon, and thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael, for going over what we know is helpful context. It sets us, and it sets us in our current state of homelessness. It is always eye-opening to hear from him. If you haven't heard from him before, it's a treat. He brings us right to where we are, which is the present. We are now going to move into a portion of the agenda where we're going to talk about the Community Shelter Board's ownership, if you will, of the readiness of our homelessness response. I have heard from many of you, whether it's been grassroots all the way to and through our important stakeholders, all the way in partnership with our local HUD representative. It is important for us to know what we are doing so that we can do more of it, but where are our gaps and where are we failing? So as I walked into this community, we had already commissioned an assessment. And this assessment came from who I'm going to virtually introduce, both Matt Lemon and Megan Kertev-Schatz. They're from Focus Strategies. And they led the comprehensive community assessment over this past 18 months. There will also be a Q&A session afterwards, when and where we want to hear from you. So I'm going to ask you right now to think about the questions that you have for Matt, think about the questions that you have for Megan about the assessment. As you came in today, you may have noticed and you were handed a blank note card. Here, we want Matt and Megan to hear exactly what community has to ask them. We've been sitting with them for 18 months, challenging what we know here within our community. This gives you an opportunity to do the same. While we hear from both Matt and Megan, please write any questions that you may have for Focus Strategies. Write this on your note card, and our ushers will be going around at the end of the rows collecting these questions. And we will then compile those and certainly, if moment allows, answer as many as we can. We have right here online. Why was this assessment commissioned as we get ready? Why was this assessment commissioned? The assessment was commissioned for a couple of things to help our community for what we know is for the now. But I'm going to tell you, 18 months later, we are out of our now and we're into our right now. It is that we are going to use this assessment to build an understanding, a grounding understanding of how housing and homelessness responses work and work together. We're here to build an understanding of anticipated economic and demographic changes that this community is moving through and how this affects our response system and how it affects the housing market here within Central Ohio. We want to disrupt, though. We want to disrupt the current system, and we want to make sure that this system does not exacerbate another disparity that we have. We want to audit our current system and be ready for what we know is one of the most contemporary systems that is within the country. We have it right here in Columbus, Ohio. We want to ensure community collaboration and that we are making a collective commitment. And finally, which is above all, we want to develop solutions that promote community well-being and fairness. And this fairness isn't for a few, but for everyone. We want to advance racial equity, and we want to ensure that residents countywide have access to safe, decent, affordable housing. I'm going to ask Megan for you to come in. Good to see you again, and Matt. Please join me in welcoming both Megan and Matt.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Shannon. Focus Strategies is a national consulting firm. We are exclusively dedicated to helping communities reduce homelessness, primarily by using their local data to understand what results you're achieving right now and what the alternatives could look like. We are particularly appreciative of the opportunity to do this work in this community because your region has such a rich history of national leadership on homelessness and specifically on data collection and reporting. And you have enormous sophistication as a community, we've learned over the last 18 months or so with research and analysis. So it's particularly exciting for us to have had this opportunity. We want to thank the Community Shelter Board, particularly Shannon for her leadership in taking on this project when it was already commissioned and underway, and helping us see it through to its conclusion. We want to thank the steering committee for this comprehensive community assessment. We want to thank people with lived experience of homelessness who participated in the community engagement opportunities, which were led along with other community engagement by RAMA. So we want to thank them as well. And we want to thank everyone in the community who responded to surveys, participated in focus groups, shared their expertise, asked their questions, offered different points of view along the way. We really appreciate that, and thank you. So as you heard, the purpose of this assessment, it was designed to understand and describe the current state of the homelessness response system in the community, and then using custom statistical tools to model future system performance, to look and see where will you be a number of years from now if you stay the course, and where will you be a number of years from now, several years from now, if you were to do something different. So that something different was a future state identified by the steering committee. That group chose a future state for your community to model, which is what we're going to share with you today. Some of what we'll share with you. And that future state they envisioned is one in which homelessness decreases, despite the anticipated community growth and continuing likely tightening of the housing market that Michael outlined the context for so well. So the assessment components, the different areas of work, thank you, Matt, included, almost 2 years, 18 months or a little over 18 months of data collection analysis efforts. We reviewed dozens of community plans, major plans, reports on homelessness, housing, related community issues. We looked at data and evaluation reports, national statistics, program and system manuals, funding applications, meeting minutes, to give you a sense of the depth and breadth that we really dug into what has been happening in your region in recent years and the state of play in your community. We also interviewed all those steering committee members. There were 15 members who were interviewed in small groups. They shared their perspectives on current strengths in the system and opportunities for improvement, their visions for the future, and insights on opportunities for the community. As I mentioned, we used custom statistical tools that use local data to project future rates of homelessness given different conditions. These projections were informed by anticipated changes to the economic and demographic landscape of the region. Again, Michael provided great context for a lot of that work, and by the current resources and performance of the homelessness response system. And then finally, RAMA Consulting led the community engagement efforts, which included conducting interviews and focus groups, administering community surveys as well, to gather input from people with lived experience of homelessness, COC contracted providers, other organizations in the community serving people who are experiencing homelessness or are housing insecure, the continuum of care, the community at large, and community leadership. So that hopefully gives you a sense of all the components of that work that we're going to be talking about. Go ahead, Matt. And all right, so I'm going to talk just a little bit more about the context. So jumping right into thank you. Jumping right into a few more numbers. So Michael laid out a lot of the housing, sort of the housing production numbers and the gaps in your community, and a little more detail that's very pointed to this assessment and the results that you'll see today. So median gross rents have increased in your region by 34% from $887 in 2017 to $1,186 in 2022. Over this same period, the national median gross rent increased less steeply by just 29%. So you're at 34%. That's a pretty significant difference compared with what's going on in the country. And of course is related to the community growth and so on that Michael was talking about. Also, rental vacancy rates fell by 40% from 6.3% in 2017 to 3.8% in 2022. Over the same period of time, national vacancy rates fell less severely by 19%. So this level of specificity and granularity is very important when we think about the housing market and the context for homelessness and the extent of homelessness in the community, because when your rental market is that tight, it's very, and your, housing production, struggles to keep pace. It becomes harder and harder for people to maintain their housing at the lowest income levels and harder to rehouse people. And then finally, only 26 housing units are available per 100 extremely low income households in your community, compared with 34 housing units for every 100 extremely low income households nationally. So you did used to look a little more, average, and your housing market is past that point. So with that as some context, I'm going to pause and hand it over to Shannon.
Just really quickly, Megan, what is interesting about this slide, which is where we're really grounding the work that we're doing, is that homelessness sometimes is really thought about as being those that are dealing with mental illness, alcohol, drug addiction, some level of disability. What we know is also probably what the providers know, is that the drivers of homelessness is that we have very low vacancies and we have very, very high rents. Likewise, which is what Focus Strategy is underscoring, we have a lack of not only affordable housing, but extremely affordable housing access. Turn it back over to you, Megan.
That's right. Thank you, Shannon. And I think this is a good moment to pass it to my colleague here, Matt.
Great, and hello, everybody. Thank you, Megan. So as Megan mentioned earlier, one of the kind of main components of the assessment was focused using some custom statistical tools we developed to project some future rates of homelessness. So we're going to take a look over the next few slides here at two different ways to look at that. The first is a baseline model. So the baseline model is our projection of what might happen in your community if you continue to stay on the current course that you're on right now, if you don't make significant changes, if your housing market continues to tighten, what might happen to homelessness in your community. After that, we'll turn to the future state model. So the model designed to align with the future state that the steering committee helped identify, and we'll look at what might be possible if you do make some of those changes going forward. So before we get too far into the details here, we wanted to step back and just talk a little bit about what system modeling is and what it can do. So our tool for system modeling is a method for simulating the homelessness response system using local data and mathematics. We use performance data on the homelessness response system, various components. So we might look at some of the outcomes from your shelter system or from your rapid rehousing system that Michael talked about earlier. And we use those to model the complex ways that people move through the system, flow into the system to start experiencing homelessness, and then ideally move back out of the system into permanent housing. Just as really want to underscore that this is really using your local data. So we work closely with CSB to get some of that data. And then we also looked at some of those items that Megan just went through on the prior slides about your rental cost and your rental vacancies to think through how those are going to affect rates of homelessness in the future. So system modeling is a method for testing a what if scenario. So what if the community keeps doing what it's doing, or what if we choose a different path? So these are estimates. They don't, exactly project the future, but they help us think through the likely impacts of homelessness and can help guide decisions about system design, system performance, and resource allocation. So with that, we will turn to the baseline model. So for this what if scenario, we are assuming that the housing affordability crisis that you're currently experiencing in Columbus and Franklin County continues to drive a decline in program outcomes. So that might mean folks are staying longer, as Michael showed. Folks are staying longer in some of your system components. Maybe they're experiencing shelter for a longer time, taking longer to find housing in the community. Similarly, the successful exits would be decreasing, so the number of folks that are able to move from shelter or other system components to housing would be going down. And as your population continues to rise, and as your housing affordability continues to decrease, more people would be expected to enter the homelessness response system. Crucially, in this baseline model, so what if you kind of keep doing what you're doing right now? This model really assumes that the response system continues operating at its currently funded scale. So what you have in the system right now would be continued into the future. And then layered over the top of that would be the increases and decreases in some of these inputs here. So if we put that into our model, you can see on the bottom left there that the result would be an estimated about 300 additional people experiencing unsheltered homelessness, a pretty large increase of about 68%, or just over 2/3 from where you were in 2023. So to look at that in visual form, we've got the graph here for you. So just to kind of orient what you're seeing, the blue line at the top is the projection of the number of people experiencing homelessness who are in either shelter or transitional housing situations. And then the red line at the bottom is the number of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. So those solid lines are your actual performance on the PIT counts over the past few years. And those dashed or dotted lines there are the estimate of our projection. So about, as you mentioned, a 68% increase, number of people, particularly in unsheltered homelessness, rising from just under 500 to a little bit over 800 in the next few years if the community keeps down its current path. One thing to note here, and I think this graph really highlights that this is the opportunity for action. Before you start to go up this path is the time to act. The best approach to ensuring that as many people as possible do not enter the system and do not experience homelessness is to address homelessness rates when it's happening. Once people do become homelessness, that will lead to folks, barriers will start accumulating, service needs will start to increase, and it will become more difficult for people to find housing and for the system to aid them in doing that. And this will not only have a human cost in the day-to-day experience and lives of people experiencing homelessness, but it will also increase cost to the system. As people experience homelessness for a longer period, their needs are more intensive, and there'll be a bigger need for more interventions like permanent supportive housing that are not only a little bit more expensive than some of the other interventions in the system, but are often limited. And that limitation in the number of available units creates a backlog, kind of perpetuating a cycle leading to increases in homelessness. So interrupting that increase as early as possible and really shifting the narrative and the path that you're on is imperative if you want to make an impact on the number of people experiencing homelessness in your community. That's it for the baseline model. I think I'll pause there and turn it back to Shannon for a moment. And then we can dive into the
As
future
you
state
all,
model.
yeah, as you all think about this model, we've been with this model for some time now, but as you're looking over it for the first time, there's a couple of things that I want to note. For us, a 68% increase in unsheltered homelessness seemed like a very large number. I will tell you that as we've been socializing this, some others have said, oh gosh, I thought it would be a little larger than that. The second is that other people have also noted that although you see year 5 there, because it is taking us 2 years to do the evaluation, 18 months, we're actually already 2 years down. So we have about 3 years to go. The third is that, as I'm going to ask Megan and Matt to come back in to tell us about, here's our baseline, but what can we do to interrupt it, is that what's good about this model is that for many of us who are in this space, it makes sense. So although we weren't able to necessarily articulate this, what we do know, it is what we're experiencing. And then finally, it was interesting because Matt and Megan, as you talked about the what-if scenario, here we are 18 months later, and every single point of that what-if scenario is happening. It's happening. So more so, too, than we talk about this model, Megan, Matt, I'll ask you to come in. And so what we do know about the model that they gave us, and especially this one, which we potentially landed on, is that we believe that it could disrupt this cycle.
Great. All right, so we will transition now to the future state model. So as Shannon mentioned, this model was developed through an iterative process. So we looked at your local data, we looked at some best practices in the field, we got feedback from the steering committee, we had input from community stakeholders that REMA helped gather as well. And this really helped develop the future state model that Megan mentioned earlier, in which homelessness decreases, and as Shannon mentioned, kind of disrupts and sets the community on a different path to achieve some better results. So in this model, what we are really looking at is a combined system-wide scaled response. And if we put all those pieces into place together, that can achieve the greatest impact. Often we see in communities kind of a piecemeal approach. So we might see some initiatives to increase diversion, for example, or to increase the percentage of folks exiting from shelter to permanent housing. And this can definitely make a difference and make a real impact on people's lives. But to really change the overall impact across the community, you have to have a system-wide approach, a combined approach that looks at several different interventions all at once. So in this model, we did another what-if scenario. So what if Columbus and Franklin County were to reduce inflow, the number of people coming into experiencing homelessness each year, by about 25%, especially for single adult households in your community. In addition to that, some changes to the shelter system. So moving to a non-congregate shelter system for families, repurposing some of the semi-congregate units that you currently have to shelter couples, LGBTQ populations, and other vulnerable individuals. And then looking at improving performance at in the shelter system as well, which would be increasing the percentage of people who move to permanent housing as quickly as possible, and calibrating the average amount of time people spend in shelter to ensure everyone possible is able to move into that housing. It would look like also adding some additional units of permanent supportive housing, about 375 units over the next 5 years. Paired with that, finally, would be adjusting the rapid rehousing program in your community to match what it takes in the housing market that you're facing currently. That would include extending the length of time people are enrolled in rapid rehousing, receiving rental subsidies, improving the implementation of the program so that 80% of people are able to successfully transition to and sustain permanent housing when they leave the program, which would be in alignment with national standards. So if we look at all those different system components and all those changes and put them into our model, we project some pretty impactful results, some high impact results. So again, kind of orienting you to this image, the blue line up at the top here is our projection for how this set of changes would impact sheltered homelessness. We see a decrease of about 20% there, about 5 years out. At the bottom here, again, red line is unsheltered homelessness, and that's where we see the largest reduction. So if all these models or all these interventions and changes are put into place, we project about an 80% reduction in unsheltered homelessness by year 5. Kind of sum up those changes for you. Again, sheltered homelessness down about 20%, unsheltered homelessness down about 80%. Overall, that's about 39, just under 40% of a reduction in where you might be if you don't change course. Now, to really change course, to really get these interventions in place, there are some costs attached to those. And so you can see those summarized on the right here. So there would be total development capital, about $137 million over the next 5 years. That is specifically to expand the county's inventory of permanent supportive housing units. On the far right, additional annual operating services costs would need to increase by about 21 million. We want to emphasize that this is over and above the current state that you're spending right now. And this would be for additional services and improved services for things like rapid rehousing, non-congregate shelter, diversion, and other supports. And with that, I will hand the mic back to Shannon.
Again, as you all look over this particular model, our future state, there were a couple of models that we reviewed. And there were models that actually had more moderate impact, also more moderate need for dollars. One of our steering committee members landed on, instead of thinking about a significant decrease, which is what we see here in this future state model, why not go for zero? Why not go for zero? I love that as the future state, which is what we should be looking for and moving towards. In the meantime, we have to make sure that we are grounded in what makes sense, that we're looking both forward and back to make sure that if we have some tools that we put into effect that also give us some impact, that we're doing more of that while we're consistently assessing this community that is growing at an economic rate that is good for most, but not so good for others. We must scale our readiness response for today's Columbus. We are no longer yesterday's Columbus, 5 years ago Columbus, 10 years ago Columbus. In fact, I have challenged us to say that those assumptions don't even work anymore. That we must sit down and start organizing ourselves for the today Columbus, and I believe that this model does that. A couple of things that I want you to keep in mind, and I'm hoping if you're still thinking about your questions, is that they started off with a scaled, coordinated response that includes our partners, that includes our stakeholders. I would also say that it probably includes the state. The second, that we concentrate more, Megan said this to me over and over again, concentrate more on the single adults. Concentrate more on the single adults. They also challenged us to make sure that our system, our homeless system, is responsive and is quick. For those of you who are in that system and are working as providers, in the last 3 years, you've seen a 100% increase in length of stay. 3 years ago, we were at 52 days. Today, we're over 100. So we feel it. The shelter system itself must go faster. But in order to do that, what you see in this model is we need more capital infrastructure. We need more dollars. But you all know we need more housing. So in saying that and summing up the model, Megan, I'm going to ask you to come back in and talk about the last pieces of that recommendation.
Thank you, Shannon. So I'll go ahead and start talking about recommendations by looking at a little visual here of the desired future state that we were modeling to. So what does it really look like to have a community that grows in a way that works for all, that maximizes livability in the community and quality of life for all, and advances equitable, stable, and dynamic homelessness response system? These are the descriptors that the steering committee in particular put forward over many months in terms of what they were looking for. in that desired future state. And to achieve that, there's basically three elements. There's moving upstream, scaling housing, and optimizing the homelessness response system. So I'll talk about recommendations in each of those areas in just a moment. It will also be very important to ensure that equity and continuous learning are infused across the system, and that investments are coordinated to achieve that future state that you collectively want to see. One of the most important differentiators in communities that make significant progress is having those their funders and funding systems fully aligned so that everyone is in the same boat, rowing in the same direction to achieve a set of intended results. So what it would actually take to achieve this desired future state would be to right-size the system for single adults. As Shannon mentioned, that's been a topic of conversation throughout our analytic period. Your system, while it does not have sort of permanent or stable funding in all aspects on the family side, the system scale is the right size for the population of families experiencing homelessness that you have. And that's not the case on the single side. And that's where you'll see the bulk of increased homelessness without significant intervention. Also, you'll need to devote significant attention to reducing racial disparities. Currently, Black households in your region experience homelessness at far greater rates. They're overrepresented in the homelessness response system, and some targeted and intentional efforts with some real commitment and dedication to working through and being present with the issues of inequities in your community will be very important. So with that, I'll walk you through some of the key recommendations. So hopefully folks can see this. But in terms of moving upstream, you'll need to divert more households, which Matt talked about, which means preventing people from falling into homelessness when they're just at the door to the homelessness response system. It's really important to note that the least expensive solution to homelessness and the most humane response is to prevent homelessness from happening in the first place. So scaling up your diversion efforts, particularly on the single side, the single adults, where you don't have that component fully in place, will be very important to sort of turning the tide as far as homelessness rates in your community in the direction they're going. We've also recommending implementing rapid exit strategies, so a set of strategies that can help households exit more quickly, particularly families in certain kinds of, or people in certain kinds of circumstances who, with certain targeted supports, may be able to exit more quickly. In terms of optimizing the homelessness response system, you need to identify replacement funds for one-time funds going away on the shelter side, because without that stock of the shelter beds, of course, you're going to see unsheltered homelessness for both families and singles would, of course, go up significantly if funding isn't available to operate the beds that you have. Also moving to non-congregate shelter for families, repurposing some of your semi-congregate spaces, some of the sort of operational pieces that you can do with the right sorts of investments will help you to be able to successfully use every bed and every dollar to help each person move into permanent housing as quickly and equitably as possible. Finally here on this, the far right, you see permanent housing. And this is about extending the duration and expanding the array and types of subsidies and supports and stock available. This can also look like increasing your partnerships with landlords and other kinds of initiatives that are, we certainly provide a lot more detail in the assessment itself. And there's a lot that the community can do to really advance in these areas and optimize the homelessness response system that you have, should you have the resources to be able to do that. All right. In terms of scaling housing, this is really about adding units and adding rapid rehousing, which are short or medium-term rental subsidies that help people get back into housing as quickly as possible. And then overall, in terms of scaling housing, we would recommend that you continue to shift your resources strategically to permanent housing. That doesn't mean defund one thing and fund another. It means strategically shifting over time your investments more heavily into housing so that you have more solutions available. We also recommend engaging a diverse group of people with lived experience. Many times the best feedback and solutions you can find are going to be from folks who can tell you what's going to work and what's not going to work in the market that you have with what people are facing. And so really expanding working with people with lived experience in devising solutions is going to be critical. We've also recommended restructuring your data reporting and some ongoing investments in strategic evaluations. As a community, you have a lot of sophistication with analysis and reports, and you do a lot to really understand the complexity of issues around you and the extent of them, and what options might be. And we would really recommend that sort of approach be taken a level down from a systems level to sort of program types, the different interventions that you have, and really look to see what's working, what's not working as your housing market especially continues to tighten. And so you'll have information readily available where you can make changes and you can know what direction things are going, so you can actually shift more nimbly sort of moving forward. And on this point around enhancing equity, learning, and engagement, we would really also recommend that you assess pay equity. Pay equity in homelessness response systems is a national challenge, a national issue. A huge part of the homelessness response workforce faces homelessness, is at risk of homelessness. It's also a racial equity issue and a gender equity issue in terms of who the workforce tends to be at the lowest income levels. And really looking at the stability of the workforce and the effectiveness of the efforts of your workforce over time might be a very helpful strategy to improving your performance overall and also addressing some of the equity issues that I've mentioned more broadly. And then finally, in terms of coordinating investment, I touched on this a little bit earlier, and Michael talked about having your unified funding agency. There's only 14 of them in the country. It's a very advantageous place to be. Most communities are working toward that status, and it does allow you to do a more effective job than most communities are able to do as far as putting all your resources together and allocating them so that everyone is moving forward toward the same goals and is really working to calibrate your system so it's everybody getting in that same boat and rowing in the same direction, measuring the same things, and knowing what progress you're making toward those goals. So that's sort of a high-level overview of the recommendations that we've made. I will pause there and hand it back to Shannon.
Good, thank you. Encouraging again, we're moving up towards the question and answer for this team. So again, if you're having any questions, any thoughts, anything that needs to come out, please, please, please write that down. I wrote down a couple of things that I love to hear: high impact, low cost, diversion, diversion, diversion. The other, which is not here, but is certainly part of it, is prevention. We've talked about that within this community. We know low cost, high impact. The other that is a little tougher to hear, but I think it's important, and I appreciate Focus Strategy calling this out, is that we have an equity issue, an equity of pay, an equity within race, and the resources that are surrounding that within race, and the burden that is once you move into the homeless system. And then that trickles down as well, although they didn't note that, into our youth, into our elderly, and any other cohort that is even more marginalized. And then finally, it is really important, and I'll uplift it for a second, is that we have HUD's most sophisticated system in the country here. 14 others have it. We need to maximize it, optimize it, and use it to the best of its ability. One of the things that Focus Strategy noted, and I actually underlined it here, is that Columbus and Franklin County community has had sustained success in reducing homelessness, especially unsheltered homelessness among families and pregnant people. So we do have some really good points of success. They're saying, gosh, move that over into the single adult section, amplify that within diversion. Let's look more at prevention. I think there's something really wonderful about the design that we have here. 38 years ago, this community shelter board was built to walk alongside the county and then to grab hold of philanthropy, and then to have this a partnership, collaborative response. I believe, from what they've even said, is those things still work if we are consistently readying the system for our own growth and our own market factors that are challenging within housing. So as I'm saying that and knowing that we're at a tipping point, Megan, Matt, I think that you are going to close with these results, and we'll move into Q&A after that. Let's close. So we have any questions that are going to be brought up? And if none, I think we already have
some,
questions.
Shannon.
Oh, perfect. Oh, sure.
Awesome.
Okay.
So we'll start with the first one. What's the rationale for focusing on single adults?
And Megan, I think that's for you.
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. I heard the question as, what's the rationale for focusing on single adults? And I really appreciate that opportunity to clarify. We are not suggesting that you focus on single adults to the exclusion of families or pregnant people. We are suggesting that you have already had a lot of success with families and pregnant people as well. That the size of your system and the resources available, though they are not steady resources, we understand there's one-time funding that will be disappearing. So that is a significant challenge, which is absolutely should be understood from our work as a priority to address if you want to achieve, I mean, even what you have, let alone the future desired state. What we're really saying is that the level of success that you've had on the family side hasn't really been you haven't invested at the same scale on the single side. So while there are things on the family side you can improve, and we've pointed out that throughout the assessment and provided specific recommendations around areas where things could be improved and optimized. The reality is that the majority of your homeless population are single adults, and that system is not currently built to scale, and it actually wasn't even built to scale a number of years ago. So as time goes by, you're sort of falling more behind in terms of having a system for single adults that moves people quickly and equitably, prevents them from becoming homeless, and then quickly and equitably moving them into housing should they fall into homelessness. So that's why the focus on single adults in our comments today and in the report in that way. But it is not one over the other. It's really how do you achieve that desired future state where you've reduced homelessness for everybody who's experiencing homelessness. And to do that, you'll have to take your single adult system to scale as you have families in the past.
Thank you, Megan. The next question, what do you mean by diversion? People we serve go into shelter as an absolute last resort. So where can they be diverted to?
That's a fantastic question. So What we've seen, diversion, which is also in some communities called problem solving, is a step, typically when people are sort of knocking metaphorically on the shelter door, facing homelessness imminently. And problem solving or diversion tends to be a series of structured conversations paired with financial assistance that helps people identify a resource, typically family or friends, somebody in the social network who might be willing to have that person or that family stay with them for a period of time at least, and perhaps longer term, if they had some resources available to them. So if the option is I'm facing homelessness tonight, I have nowhere else to go, and what we offer is shelter, then of course folks will need shelter. But what we found around the country is that when you really implement a robust diversion program, or it's really an approach and a set of resources that you make available at that stage, you can help people to use the social networks they have to prevent them from ever spending a night in a shelter. So I think part of it's that resource. One specific example I might give is if you're not really welcome back, say to your brother's house, because everybody there is poor and you're eating all the food and you're not, there's sort of tensions happen. Well, if there's financial resources that you have available, you can sort of chip in. Maybe we help you get on food assistance, these kinds of things that can kind of bridge that gap and help people to be successful in the kinds of environments that many very low-income people are in, which include being doubled up, which has been found to be, less traumatic for people than, for example, ending up in a shelter or unsheltered outside.
Okay, so the next question, what are the data sources for the shelter and transitional housing data?
Yeah, so for the modeling work that we did, the data that we use primarily comes from your local system. So we work closely with CSB to access data from HMIS, your local homeless management information system, that collects performance data on shelters, transitional housing, and a variety of other interventions as well.
Thank you, Matt. Do cost estimates account for savings that might come from reduced healthcare costs, especially emergency care, reduced city services, for example, public safety, neighborhood services, and things like that?
Not in the way I'm guessing the question is kind of getting at. So it has generally been our experience that when we think about, for example, if you don't have anybody hypothetically experiencing unsheltered homelessness, or very few people, you'll have less service calls, fire, police, et cetera. You might have fewer emergency department visits. So that was an example, I believe, in that question. And so you would expect to see costs go down for the hospital system or the first responders systems. And in fact, that is likely true. But what we have seen is that that's mostly considered cost avoidance in most communities, because the resources can't necessarily be taken from one system and put into another, as an example. But you would expect to see those kinds of costs decrease over, and particularly over time, if you're using these strategies year over year.
Makes sense. So it seems like the proposed methods to achieve outcomes, or improved outcomes specifically, are the same methods currently in use. Why not increased real innovation?
That's a great question. I would say the recommendations have a little bit of both. Certainly, things within your existing system that are part of your of your core homelessness response. For example, all of the beds and resources that you have for shelter, and then certainly all of the resources that are, for example, HUD resources. Folks might remember that slide that Michael showed in his presentation around, with the star, like which of these different interventions, will HUD pay for, that kind of thing. So a lot of the resources you have are for those dedicated purposes. So trying to figure out how can you optimize those within what's eligible and allowable, of course, is a really important strategy for your community and all communities that have blended funds from different sources. And then I would say on the sort of innovation side, what we've put in there is sort of a recommended sort of a different set of strategies for rapid exit, for example, which isn't something that you currently do. The diversion programming with more robust financial assistance, I wouldn't say is brand new innovation, but it is a more recent innovation in the homelessness response field, where there is strong data to support that strategy, that it will be very effective. So that's a kind of bias that we had when looking at what is most likely to work, is where is there data available to suggest that something will be effective. And then we did actually recommend sort of a PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act kind of approach in the continuous learning and evaluations that we talked about for a minute, which was really looking at how can you try things, see how it goes, and then shift, adjust to what you find, and improve things over time. This also applies should new models come out or if you identify something that you'd like to try in your community. But we would really recommend not necessarily going all in on a newer idea, but rather really looking at where there is evidence to support that it will work, and then using this sort of step-by-step, strategy, this sort of PDSA cycle I was talking about. We recommend you start with a pilot and then see, is it working in our community? Will this work? Is it effective? And then use those results and be able to kind of nimbly adapt and shift as you go. And I think, or I'm hopeful, that if you're able to adopt that kind of approach, you'll be able to dedicate some level of resource toward that kind of innovation and continuous improvement. And ideally really bake that into the culture that you have in the community, so that it's okay to fail. It's okay to try. It's a pilot, see if something's going to work, and then figure out what didn't work, and revisit, move forward, and see if you can really find the optimal set of interventions in your community.
Thought-provoking. Thank you, Megan. And we do have time for one more question. For all of the questions submitted to us, and there were many, thank you. We will try to make sure that we respond via social media and other channels. So the last question that we have, why no mention of shared housing?
That's a great question. Shared housing is a really important resource and strategy, which for anyone who isn't familiar, shared housing typically refers to unrelated adults who are sharing a particular unit, housing unit, a home, which obviously helps with cost. Thank you for pointing that out. I'm sure that we didn't actually call it out by name, like by that name, shared housing. But certainly in the diversion piece, which is a very significant recommendation, and as far as both rapid rehousing goes, although it's a little harder by funding source because you can't use every funding source for shared housing. But those strategies all do assume that it will be a mix of people getting their own housing and people doubling up or sharing housing. There are different strategies you can use for things like roommate matching, and there's a lot of different things that different communities do with I would say, somewhat mixed results. But that's the kind of thing in your market and the way your market is continuing to go that I would really recommend you consider implementing that kind of PDSA cycle. Do a pilot, see how it's going, see what your landlords will do and not do, and what funding sources you can put together that will allow you to do that, and see if that might be a particular fit for you in the way that shared housing is usually talked about. But we would certainly support that and think that it's included amongst the housing options.
Great, that's interesting. So as promised, we will get the answers to the rest of the questions to you. And I'd like to turn it back over to Ms. Shannon Isom.
Thank you. We are going to say goodbye to focus strategies in this portion of our agenda. We're going to move pretty quickly over to a live panel, but before you leave, Megan and Matt, I have spent my entire time here with you, and you have challenged the system. You have challenged our thinking. You have looked over and audited every one of our both quantitative and qualitative data and asked us to show up differently. To the city, the county, and the partnership who commissioned this audit of our system, thank you. Thank you. It has armed this community, armed this leader with enough information for us to say that we can do this. And Megan, you have continuously reminded me of that. So thank you. And for that, we sign off with Focus Strategies. Thank you also for your participation. As Sharice noted, those questions we will continue to look over. We're going to make sure that we answer them, and we'll have those on our website. Please continue to enjoy. This is a couple of hours where we're carving out specifically around our community. How do we solve for the readiness of our system? How do we move within housing development? Make yourself comfortable. I believe we have some things outside as well that you're comfortable. As we move into our next portion, which is our discussion, our panel discussion, I am going to ask that Carly Booth come and join me. I'm going to welcome her to the stage. She is the Executive Director of the Affordable Housing Alliance of Central Ohio. She'll be moderating our panel discussion. Carly. Okay, knock it out.
Thank you so much, Shannon, and thank you as well, Matt and Megan at Focus Strategies, for joining us today. And I just want to kind of very personally say thank you to the Shelter Board for being so, I think, explicit and transparent. Homelessness is a community problem, and discussing it as a community and attempting to solve it as a community, I think, is very Columbus-like, and I appreciate this. I am pleased to be joining you this afternoon to moderate a panel with many of the policymakers and decision makers in our community, and it is with great pleasure that I am going to welcome to the stage our distinguished speakers. So please join me in thanking State Representative for House District 1 and Assistant Minority Leader, Dontavius Gerals. Next up, Franklin County Commissioner Kevin Boyce. Franklin County Recorder Danny O'Connor. And someone you already know very well, Council Member Shayla Favor. Thank you all again. I'm a note taker. I got my clipboard. I see many of you do too. It was writing down a lot of the data and the statistics that we heard, and some of it was new. and some of it is not new, and I don't know that that makes it any less shocking. But some of the things we heard was that the point in time count, the number of people experiencing homelessness in our community is up. It's over 2,000 individuals at this point. We're only building half of the homes that we need to keep pace with the growth in our community. Rents are going up at a rate that is on par with New York City, and I think that's objectively terrifying for a lot of people. And if we do not act, we're going to see another 68% increase in unsheltered homelessness in the very near term. It's a long-winded way of saying, what are you sitting with? What are your initial impressions after hearing that report? Maybe we can start with Representative Geralds.
Well, first and foremost, this is hot. How y'all doing today? My name is Dontavius Geralds. I just so happen to be your state representative representing the beautiful House District 1. You're sitting in it today. But so if you live in the South Side, if you live in Bexley, Berwick, Franklinton, King Lincoln, Milo Grogan, if you live off Old Town East, German Village, if you live over near the airport, I represent you every single day in the beautiful State House. You know, for me, I think as a kid who grew up in a community where every time I looked outside my house, I saw what real disinvestment looked like. Every day I'm bringing those narratives back into the State House to really think about what can we do to build the type of Ohio where we are reducing the number of people who ultimately end up in homelessness. Because I believe that if you get to homelessness, it's already too late. And so I have bills that are working on economic justice so that families don't have to work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet to pay for the rising cost of rent. You know, I'm working every day to think about how do we build the first ever foster care scholarship so that when foster youth are coming out of the system and they're thinking about what their next step is going to be, it's not, they don't know. They don't know what the next, what tomorrow is going to look like when that system is gone. And so really thinking upstream in the State House, right, is systemic statewide policy so that we can address homelessness at the root level versus having to continually try to address it in ways in which it's almost a Band-Aid over the infection. And so the work that I think from the stats you mentioned, they're disheartening. And it shows the urgency that we have more work to do. And every single day is about all of us coming together in a room, at the State House, in city halls, in the county buildings, to figure out how can we address homelessness in a real and intentional way because people deserve it.
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Boyce, President of the Franklin County Board of Commissioners, and I'm honored to sit before you today. So since Rep. Geralds described his district, let me describe mine. It's all of Franklin County.
That's it.
That's it. It's Franklin County. But why I say that jokingly is that you don't have to have lived here your entire life like myself to appreciate and see the growth in Central Ohio. If you moved here 5 years ago, you can see the growth. If you moved here 10 years ago, you certainly see it. And I think 5 years from now and 10 years from now, the growth will be substantial. The Columbus we see and the Central Ohio we see then is not what we see today. Our growth is here, it's coming, and it is going to be substantial. That being said, for Franklin County, our task in this conversation, so you asked the question, what was the takeaway from the report? The first thing is I would say, and I hope don't be offended by this, I would say, is that tell me something I didn't already know. With the growth in Central Ohio, we know that at the core of our needs is housing. It's just that simple. It is fundamental to the quality of life. It is fundamental to families and their sustainability. And so we know it's at the heart of the discussion. 2 things jump out at me from the assessment. Actually 3. First is, I don't know where Shannon Isom is, but it's brilliant for you to corner all of these financial decision makers on stage and get us on record saying, I know where you're going. I told Rep. Geralds, I said, you know what this is, right? And he said, absolutely. So that's the first part. That's actually a good idea because it's rare that there's someone that convenes the different layers of government to engage in a conversation together. The second thing that jumps out at me is some of the issues that we're facing with inflation. And you see it in the cost of rental today. At the county level, through our rental assistance program, never in my 8 years have we seen such a substantial increase in growth in the need. Third, you can measure it in addition to the data that was presented. You see it in things that we're not talking about, like the food pantry needs and the growth in those spaces. At the county, we see it in every level of need-oriented measurements that indicate not only is the growth coming before us, you can see the orange barrels on the street and the cranes in the sky, even new highways going in, and you can see it. But what is more alarming, not in the assessment report, is all of the different layers of indicators that say the problem is far bigger and greater. And then I'll conclude in saying this, that if anything, it underscores the idea that we have to be all in this together. The only way that we're able to address the big scheme of the need is for the city, the county, our elected office holders, but more importantly, the region to begin to work together. It is not just the city of Columbus's challenge. And we've got to bring the mayors of the other municipalities and the city councils of the other municipalities to the table and engage in a serious conversation about density, about public transportation, about access to health care, and other things that drive what it means to live in a community. So I'm grateful for the assessment, but I'm even more grateful, Shannon, for the convening of the conversation that will allow us to put our collective institutions together to take on the problem.
Absolutely. That's it. That's it.
Amen to what Commissioner Boyce said. We were elected at the same time countywide, and I've always thought it was smart to just kind of agree with him on most things. But, you know, my first thought when I see the numbers increasing is I'm worried, and then I get really worried when I think of how much worse it could be, because my office, I'm the county recorder, and we deal with every bit of real estate in the entirety of Franklin County. So we both represent a huge district full of people, over 2 million people, or just short of 2 million people, probably over 2 million people pretty soon. But, and we, with every document we record, we have a fee that goes into the Low Income Housing Trust Fund. And every single year, there is a discussion, and it always surprises me because we saw the data about where homelessness is. It's not always where you think it is. Every year there's a conversation of statewide electeds who are recorders talking to their state reps in far off parts of the state where they want to get rid of the Low Income Housing Trust Fund because they think it doesn't benefit their region, their community. And you know this conversation, Representative Geralds, and I'm from a rural part of the state, and I always point out to them that these problems exist in every single part of the state. Now, we're here focused on Central Ohio and on Columbus and on the specific stuff that we looked at on that map, but what we have to be cognizant of is there are some wolves at the door who want to get rid of these programs that are absolutely vital. We have funded the Low Income Housing Trust Fund with tens of millions of dollars since I've taken office, and that money goes to nonprofits, and no one stretches a dollar like a nonprofit. No one takes that dollar and turns it into $1.20. We know that. And so being aware of the legislative fights that can occur, and it's important that the speaker was here today, and that's a demonstration that that's someone who understands that this fight is not just centered on those cities or those places where the highways are. This is a fight across the entire state. And so, you know, as we look at our recording volume, which is down, last year it was down 23% because people aren't, you know, getting mortgages. There's a slowdown in some housing stuff. That reduces our Low Income Housing Trust Fund contributions by about 22%. So we're always going to be watching as interest rates go down, as inflation cools, as the economy hopefully stabilizes and strengthens. You know, those numbers will go back up. We will continue to fight and make sure that those vital funding sources stay in place and stay a reliable source for these entities that stretch them and do a great job with those dollars.
So, you know, my response is that it affirms what we have known at City Council has been upon us for quite some time. In 2019, when I became a member of Columbus City Council, At that time, Franklin County was filing 18,000 evictions a year, which was the highest number of evictions in the state of Ohio. In response to that, one of the first acts from my office was to create an eviction prevention program, which laid the foundation for our emergency rental assistance program that's activated today. I say that because now, here we are 4 or 5 years later, and we are at 24,000 filings a year, eviction filings a year, which once again, it's the highest in the state of Ohio. These are not numbers that garner applause. They are actually pretty shameful. And while evictions may not be the only cause of homelessness, it is the leading cause of homelessness in our community. And it leads to instability on so many different sectors, whether we're talking about housing instability or food insecurity. It impacts one's ability to remain gainfully employed. And all of this works as a system in a negative way so that our residents are not afforded the opportunity to be safely housed in our community. If you don't have a job to go to that pays a living wage, then you're not going to be able to obtain the housing. And if you are able to obtain the housing, will you be able to maintain said housing? And if we think about our children who are impacted by homelessness, evictions and such, are they going to be able to study the way they need to be able to prepare and to graduate so that they can be gainfully employed? Do we see how these things work together? And so this report confirms for me what we know has been happening in our community. Columbus is the 14th largest city in the country, the only city that is growing in the Midwest. And while that presents great opportunities, it presents great challenges for us to collectively work together to resolve. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to stand on this stage, sit on this stage with these leaders in our community, not only have the power to help to fund many of these programs, but also have the ability to legislate in such a way to protect residents who are being discriminated against in our community every single day.
Well, and I want to recognize and thank you, as well as a number of the suburban leaders throughout our community. Because of your advocacy efforts, we do now have about 85% of Franklin County residents who are protected by an anti-discrimination source of income ordinance. Incredibly important. But I want to thank you, in particular, Commissioner Boyce, for being very frank that this isn't something we can tiptoe around. We need to be direct about it. And one of the things that I found a little bit reassuring about the report and the analysis is that it is a solvable problem. It's a matter of money. And where are we going to get those resources? And I wonder if perhaps Commissioner Boyce and Councilmember Favor, as two of the local voices in this conversation, where can we get sustainable, predictable funding to continue this progress and to avoid those cliffs?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll start with that. You know, one, let me just say that I think it is about funding. It's always about funding. Every issue that we take on, it comes down to resources, always. In housing, it is a quite expensive endeavor, so it's always a little more resources. But I also think it's all about land use, too. You know, I think at the end of the day, I want to commend the city of Columbus for taking on their zoning code and really addressing what has been a antiquated and archaic zoning code, even going back to when I was chair of zoning committee back when I was on city council. But this land use issue is connected to land density issue. And the land density issue is connected to some of our regional challenges with some of our suburban partners. And so I think if we can peel back the layers on how we look at development in terms of density, and with density also comes infrastructure investment and things like that, which is very expensive, but that's where we can most be creative. And that leads me to my second point, and that's it is about the overall amount of money, but it's also about the creativity and the use of the funds. For example, and I'm not, Franklin County as an institution, we don't get everything right. Let me be very clear about that. There are many things that we are working to improve, to do better, and to have a greater impact. But one of the things that I think with the idea of creative thinking and creative use of funds is the use of our magnet fund, for example, to create funds that allow us to underwrite components of development, particularly affordable housing development. And here's where that comes into play for some of this regional conversation. Those funds can be, many suburbs use density, or sometimes they use material restrictions. So they might say it has to be all natural material, like stone or just, whatever, that sometimes, but all the time, raises the cost. So the magnet funds that we put into a fund to be used by developers can be dedicated to the mitigation of those type of costs to create affordable housing opportunities in places where usually there are barriers created to the cost of the type of housing. And so I think some of it is about thinking differently about how we apply funds. And then you ask, where can we get other funds from? Well, this is the best, in my opinion, the best use of what they call public-private partnership, where it takes a little bit of all of the big three Ps, working together on nearly every development that will give us the type of stretch in our dollars that allow us to get bigger bang for our buck. And I think that's an area that we can grow in Central Ohio.
Yeah, I think that's good. What I will add is that here's the reality, is that there is no cost difference to building what is deemed market rate versus what is deemed affordable. Yep. The only difference being that there has to be subsidies that are incorporated into that project to bring those numbers down so that the rent on the back end to you all here is therefore affordable. And so I want to thank you once again to the residents of the city of Columbus who approved the $200 million housing bond a few years ago, because those dollars help to support filling in those gaps of projects that we approve every single Monday that is putting more housing units into our community. There has to be advocacy that's happening at the state level and at the federal level. Once again, when we talk about there being no difference in the cost to build a project, many affordable housing projects, not just in Columbus and Franklin County, but across the country, are built through the use of low-income housing tax credits. And unfortunately, Franklin County has not fared well, and specifically Columbus has not fared well with the way that the scoring is currently calculated. Now, once again, we're the only growing city in the state of Ohio, and so there have got to be some changes to many of the criteria that those folks are using to decide whether or not certain projects get funded or not. And then what I will also add is that today is the first day of early voting. And I mention that because you need to be paying attention to what people are talking about as it relates to housing from a federal perspective. The city of Columbus cannot solve this problem on its own. The state of Ohio is not going to be able to solve this problem on its own. There is going to have to be dollars that are going to be fused into these communities, very much like our COVID-19 response dollars that we have seen infiltrated throughout our communities. And so knowing that your voice is your vote, that is another reason why it's incredibly important to show up and let these folks know what is important for you and your community.
Representative.
Y'all can clap for that. That's good. So I really am proud to have our speaker, Jason Stevens, here earlier today. as our recorder mentioned, because we are doing the work in the Ohio legislature. And one of the things I'll say is, when we talk about funding, there's the city, there's the county, and then there's the state. Now, I understand. I sit in a position where I'm in the minority, particularly the super minority, but don't get it twisted, y'all. I pass bills every single time as I'm in the legislature, one of the hardest working members, working to make sure that we're bringing resources back. And what do I mean when I say that? We fought to make sure that in the most recently passed budget that we passed $100 million in the low-income tax credit program. And you all can clap for that, $100 million, y'all, right? But not only that, I also, because to your point, Councilwoman Favor, there were Columbus projects in my district that did not receive funding because of the scoring. And guess what I got? That's what I did. I got on the phone and I said to the agency that's working through that, what in the heck is going on? Let's have a meeting. Let's look at these rules. And guess what they did? They said, well, Representative Geralds, there's a comment period for these new rules for these two projects you're looking that didn't score well, and we want to make sure that these rules fit within the confines of what Columbus is currently navigating. And so I worked with the developers, I worked with the Light Tech agency, and guess what? Those two particular projects are not being funded, one of which is going to be a woman-centered community center and homes for women who are single parents. And so it is so intentional that you all understand that the work that we do in the State House literally could mean the difference between whether those projects get funded because of rules or they get not funded because you don't necessarily know who to talk to navigate why is it like this. And so I'm asking every single one of you, if you never been to the State House, if you've never been to any one of our offices, there's many members who represent you in the State House, representing Central Ohio. Contact us. If you see a project, if you have an idea, you have a law that's going to address homelessness, contact us, because every single day we're trying to do everything we can to have a war on homelessness. That's what we really need to put our stake in the ground and say, we're going to fight homelessness tooth and nail until this no longer exists in this region. And so we have to do that through the state, and that's why we're here as a partner.
Can I add one more thing to further emphasize Representative Gerald's cry to reach out, to contact your state representative. Also, and I don't mean to put any more responsibility on, I know everybody's got crazy schedules and things of that nature, but not just reaching out and contacting, but also coming and providing your testimony.
Please.
Coming and providing your testimony. By far none, we hear over and over, Columbus, why don't you do something about these rising rents? Why don't you put a stopgap up there? Do something about some rent control. Well, just a few years ago, through some political maneuvering. Some trickery. That's very polite. Some trickery. A preemption on rent control passed through the State House, which means no municipality in the state of Ohio can do anything to impact rents in that capacity. And so never disregard the importance of your voice and showing up and providing testimony to me and my colleagues, or to even Commissioner Boyce and his colleagues, and Representative Geralds and the folks at the State House, because those testimonies are so critically important to what gets passed and what does not get passed.
And I want to come back to this theme of public engagement and speaking your voice, but I want to turn to Recorder O'Connor. And you said something, and I started drawing little hearts and stars on my paper. You talked about a tool that you're using, a fee, I think it was.
Yeah.
Long story short, is there more where that came from?
Gerald's? There could be.
There could be.
No, there is not. We max it out every year, and we do a good job of working with the commissioners to make sure that that funding stays in place. It is a statutorily mandated fund, but like I said before, it is always at risk, and we are always advocating across the state that folks are aware that that money is very, very necessary. And to expand on something that was talked about, I think the word trickery or creativity, was utilized. I think that with administrative offices, like recorder, or, God willing, we steal council member favor at the county and she's our next prosecutor. But our administrative offices, there's a lot of smart things that you can do that are quiet policy that can really move the needle for folks. Like, we waive recording fees for any housing projects that are done with the land bank because we don't want to add those costs to that type of scenario. We created a program a couple years ago in my office called Vital Docs, where if someone is suffering from homelessness, we will record their vital documents for them so that when their time comes to obtain housing or obtain whatever the next step for them is back to getting on their feet, those documents can be securely transferred over. And the reason that we found out about that was, I think it was one of your board members, Barb Benham, talked to me about a lot of the domestic violence situations where documents would be damaged. So we recognize that if someone is a victim of domestic violence, one of the first things an abusive partner will do is destroy documents, because destroying those documents can take away someone's ability to navigate their next steps. We encourage individuals, if you have a nefarious landlord or someone you don't trust, bring your lease to our office and we will record it for you. And that way you are protected. So if they try and say, well, they violated this part of the lease and therefore they're going to be a part of that 22% eviction rise that we saw last year, they can fight back. So utilizing that type of creativity is something that we always encourage partners to do, and other agencies within government.
Commissioner.
Yeah, I just want to add too. I mean, the cost of, and I think Councilmember Favor said it, but I'll just go a little deeper. The cost of housing is not simply just driven on the cost of bricks and mortar, because oftentimes, and I happen to also be a banker away from politics, oftentimes it's rooted in interest rates. And you saw 2 weeks ago, the Feds cut the interest rate by 50 basis points. That's significant because the interest rates today are at a 20-year all-time high, and I saw a refinancing recently that doubled in the interest rate from the time they did it 10 years ago, or maybe it was a little longer than that, to the time they refinanced to pull their equity out of the home today, and the interest rate doubled. And so there are embedded costs in, the cost of labor has gone up. The cost of bricks and mortar have gone up. And then when you look at the tax rolls, every time we vote on a levy, every time there are just so many things that impact the cost. And here's where I'm going with that. It is really when Recorder O'Connor mentioned the reduction of fees. I mean, it's really, those are places where we can really get creative, but also would point to Sherbrooke Sullivan, our treasurer, who's done things like with her linked deposit program, which actually reduces that interest rate for the developer side. So they're in a position where that savings can be passed on to the renter or to the buyer or even investor in many cases. And it's that kind of creative thinking. And just really quickly, the way it works, the way she's been very creative with this model, and I don't know if she's here today, but the way this model works is essentially the Treasury, the county Treasury is a couple $2 billion, but she places those funds, the liquidity of those funds, the cash portion of the funds, into a banking institution. That banking institution, generally it's in some form of an instrument like a CD, let's say, let's keep it easy, a CD. Well, the bank then owes the county an interest for the CD that we've invested, that put that money in. What Sherbrooke Sullivan is saying is, okay, I'm making some numbers up, so don't quote me on this, but okay, if we're paying you, if the CD pays 5%, we're going to send a portion of that interest to the developer to reduce the costs, and in turn, the developer reduces the costs to the renter or to the buyer. And that's real movement, real creative use, and it's not, Sherbrooke Sullivan, you could say, well, you're giving up earnings on those funds that would have come to the county. But not really, because where it's really going is back into the hands of the people, because it's reducing their cost to be in a home. So I think it's that kind of creative thinking and reduction of fees and different things that really will kind of quietly move the needle, but are real savings.
Well, and I think I'm telling you how old I am, but the thing that's coming to my mind, there's this Meatloaf song. I'll do anything for love, but I won't do that. And the thing that I like about Central Ohio is I haven't had the thing. I don't know what we won't do yet. Whether it's the magnet fund or it's zoning reform or it's a linked deposit or it's fee waiver, it's bureaucracy. We're trying everything.
Yes.
When we talk about development and building out of some of this crisis, and I know you can't exclusively build, you have to look at policy, you have to look at programming as well. But on that construction development side, where we know that some of the biggest challenges lie is in that extremely low income space. And not to get too jargony, that's somebody who's earning 30% AMI, but to put it more humanely, it's someone who's working full-time.
Yep.
Full-time. And not at minimum wage either, 13, 14 bucks an hour. What would be considered essential jobs, kids, daycare, school bus drivers, a lot of our healthcare. But it's some of the hardest to build for. Can you talk a little bit about where our horizon is as a community? What else can we be doing? What other tools should we be looking at?
So I don't know how real we're going to have this conversation today, but I think we have to address NIMBY once and for all. If we really are going to address how do we make sure that there are affordable housing options, not just concentrated in Columbus, but concentrated where there are centers like Intel, right? Every time I talk to folks in Intel, we're talking about how we're going to build more $1 million homes, not necessarily homes for those who are affordable, right? For those families so that they can literally take a short bus ride, if necessary, to work at the Google Database Center, or go work at the Meta Database Center, or work at the Intel, making much more than the $15 minimum wage, which we know in today's standard doesn't even cut it for families today in Columbus. And so I think the question at hand is, how do we make sure that people, neighborhoods, understand that folks with lower means than them still deserve housing? Right? We need to get to the real philosophical question at hand is, how do we become neighbors again? How do we make sure that our systems and our policies invite people from every socioeconomic perspective into these communities to say, we see you, we affirm you, and guess what? You should live here too. And so that's what's at stake for me, right? And I'm gonna say this to you all. You know, we talked about the 22% of folks who have rental evictions. The truth of the matter is there's no statewide law right now in current existing in Ohio statute. Once you get an eviction, it is a scarlet letter for life. For life. There are other things that you can get sealed in your record, but you cannot get an eviction sealed off your record. And what does that do? That means that those families who was one paycheck, one crisis, one healthcare moment away, and they couldn't get themselves out of that situation, they're now locked out of the affordable housing space for a very long time. And so one of the things that I'm working on, and I know Senator Herschel Craig, if he was here, he would say, that's my bill. I'm like, you're right, we're doing it together. But he's been fighting every single day in the legislature as our senator to pass legislation so that we can seal evictions once and for all so that these families won't get locked out of the opportunity to have affordable housing because they deserve it. So I'm gonna let my colleagues talk about the funding mechanisms, but when you
you were part of the funding too,
I
man.
know I
Don't try
am.
to put that on. We can get out of that. No.
I'm messing with you. But the truth is, I think we need to have ownership across the region to say affordable housing can exist in places like Bexley, in places like Gahanna, in places like Reynoldsburg, just as much as it can happen in places like Grove City or places like Columbus, right? It's going to take the entire region to take ownership of this problem, or we're never going to truly address it in a real systemic way.
So I absolutely agree with Representative Gerald's. We have to get in the mindset of YIMBY, yes in my backyard.
Come on, that's it.
And so that has been the rallying cry outside of the movement that we have created at the City of Columbus, which is around the notion of housing for all. If housing is a human right, period, then we need to be building across all income levels for folks in our community. So that means that someone with greater means is not taking a unit, if you will, away from somebody who needs to be income qualified for that unit. That is why it's incredibly important. You will see us, maybe one day we're voting for a market rate project, and then the next day we're voting for something that might be 80% of the area median income. And in the same vein, we're going to do something that is around permanent supportive housing as well. On top of that, just this past Friday, in the news, you would have seen some conversation about a study that the City of Columbus commissioned to evaluate what it would look like to stand up a program that would provide a right to counsel for anyone who is facing evictions. We know that when folks have representation by counsel in eviction court, they are less likely to be evicted from that home. And what we haven't talked about here today is the need to preserve what is already affordable in our community, which also contributes to the sustainability of people remaining in those homes, right? And so that's why it is incredibly important for us to really wrap our minds around what it would look like to fully fund a program in Columbus and Franklin County. At Columbus, we're doing it to the tune of about $5 million. You will go down, if you find yourself in eviction court, that you have access to a legal aid attorney that is going to be there on your behalf. And so what this is saying is that an investment between Columbus and Franklin County at the tune of $6.1 million, we would see a fiscal savings of around $24.4 million a year. Why is this important? Because we also haven't talked about the unintended consequences of an eviction. That means that you have issues around health care that you can't resolve, and the county is funding that, the state is funding that at egregious levels every year. We talk about our students who are underperforming and could be performing better, and the dollars that are being allocated in a different way in order to support them. And what I've been saying is that you even pay now or you pay later. And so that's why it is important for us to think outside of the box, for Columbus to do everything as Meatloaf said, because there is no silver bullet. I'm really struggling to remember how the song goes right now.
I'm not singing it again.
But there is no silver bullet to solve our housing crisis, our eviction crisis, and our homelessness crisis. We do need to be throwing every single dart at the wall to make sure that we are servicing every resident in our community.
And if I may, I think that dart includes transportation, because on election day, and now every day is election day because early voting is open, but there's Link Us, which is on the ballot, which talking about neighbors being connected more and talking about all the development with Intel, Google, all these different things, being able to move people from place to place in an affordable way, that alleviates this cost, and that allows for, okay, maybe we can hire some more childcare so that we could further our career. There's so many impactful things that can be done if we pass that. And, you know, you said I would do anything. Well, we haven't done that yet, but we have a chance in November to do that and make a transformational investment in the infrastructure of this community.
And I'll just add too, because I mean, we've seen a lot of levies on the ballot. I mean, they come through the county, so we see them all. I think he's being summoned. Danny has to pick up his kid from daycare, so that's why that's what that is. Just so you know, if he walks off stage, I got your back covered, man.
Thank you.
So where I was going with that was one of the things that I'm concerned with, and again, I've supported all those levies. I voted today, and I voted for all the levies. But what I've asked the county to consider doing is a cost of living study. You know, because my concern in the greater conversation is that if the cost of living is just growing, some of those costs will just keep up with that cost. And so when we do a CODA levy, that is embedded in a sales tax, essentially. When we do a children's services levy, that's embedded in your property tax, you know. And so I'm always worried about the double-edged sword of voting for those kinds of things, because it's critical to the core foundation of this community and who we represent. But in the bigger scheme of things, and I don't want to get all technical, but many of those taxes are regressive meaning that they tax everybody the same no matter how much money you make. And so being thoughtful about our tax policy is another area that in this conversation about housing and the cost of living, we've got to get serious about. The county has really dug into racism and poverty as part of our value set in addressing some of these bigger issues. And until we're able to get at this sort of wealth building element and the cost of living element, which is cost of living has always been one of Central Ohio's greatest assets. But if that's being eroded, then we have to be thoughtful about ways to mitigate that so that we can continue to address affordable housing, but support families when they're in most need situations.
It feels so circular sometimes, right? We need to do this, but to do that, we lose that. And then you feel like you're talking in rounds at times. And I've always felt that one of the ways we can see through to clarity is by talking to the people who are affected, right? We are representational government. It is the folks here, and as you said, the voters who tell elected officials and policymakers how to navigate those problems. And you've talked a lot about NIMBY, folks coming out and saying no. But how often do you see people unprovoked stand up and say, yeah, I dig what you're doing? Yeah. And do you feel like there is enough of the yay vote making themselves heard? Or are we too one-sided?
So I would say from 2 years ago, as a part of our annual Housing for All conference, we invited I believe she's the president of the YIMBY organization out west, to be our keynote speaker and really present this notion of what it would look like to stand up a movement of YIMBY folks in our community, because I know that they exist, right? But nothing gets people out more than something that they don't like, and someone has pissed them off in their neighborhood, right? Just come down to City Hall on a Monday night. But the call to action to be for those of us in this room, and I know that there are more folks who believe wholeheartedly that housing is a human right, period, that they believe that everyone should have access to safe and stable housing in our community. I believe that it is incumbent upon us to look outside of just our specific neighborhood and show up and provide your feedback and your testimony when it is absolutely needed in these moments. Because I'll tell you, once again, we are hearing from those who don't want it. And they will wait hours. You can pull up any housing hearing that I have hosted, and you will see the hours of content of folks that more than likely are there to stand against those projects, zoning included. And so while we are doing what we can to continue to legislate progressive policies and things of that nature, we cannot do this job alone. We do need our residents to provide us feedback on the legislation that we are proposing. I have said over and over again that we've got great ideas, right? But we don't have just the answer. The answer could be sitting with you in this room today. And we are willing to hear all of that feedback from you all and do the research that it would take to enact many of those policies. We just got to get activated.
I'm going to unfortunately begin to move us to a close. One of the favorite games that we play in Central Ohio is who do we feel like today? What peer are we comparing ourselves to? And last year, the Alliance released a report called Finding Home in the Heart of It All, where we did a detailed analysis of how Columbus looks and smells so much like Austin circa 15 years ago. Cute, quirky, cow town. We got some growth pressures, but they'll probably sort out on their own. And you fast forward to today, Austin is building 4 times as many homes as we are, despite having almost the exact same footprint of land, despite having almost the exact same number of people. But they did it as a reaction to homelessness that went off the charts. And we're worried about 800, 900 unsheltered individuals, rightly so. They're dealing with 5,500. So who do you see as our comparison, and what lesson are you learning from them?
Sorry. Oh, okay. I'll start. I got two microphones, y'all, so I'm gonna answer twice. Answer for Danny too. No. You know, cities and counties and even states in some ways are as different as we are people. You know, there aren't really any true comparisons to Columbus. And just like with people, come different approaches. And, you know, I know the Austin story, and what I would argue is different than Central Ohio is the region is very different. The cities may have the same footprint, but our region is, there is a real contrast. So when you say what is the comparable set, I probably would look at that in terms of the Midwest. And I would probably think of it in terms of cities that went through a growth spurt that in how they addressed the growth spurt for their time. And I probably would look more to Indianapolis than I would Austin for different reasons. But even that being said, you can't cookie cut take what is done in Austin and what's done in Indianapolis and plop that in Columbus and expect the same results. You have to look at the region for its uniqueness, for the opportunities that haven't been tapped into, and more importantly, our value set and priorities. And, you know, to me, that kind of separates us, because even if you looked in Ohio, for example, Columbus has a very different, we're on a different stage of our life than Cincinnati and Cleveland. They're very mature cities. Columbus is is not a mature city. I mean, meaning that Cincinnati and Cleveland have kind of had their biggest, the best days. We haven't even touched the surface. And so we're like that gangly teenager walking through your house that you don't know what they're going to be when they grow up. That's what Central Ohio is. So I say that to say there is no real place to compare. However, if I had to focus on the unique things about Central Ohio, and what puts that in my mindset is our region is very different, and the region is not growing as fast. That's why Columbus, Councilmember Favors said it so well, Columbus is growing at just a different kind of rate, especially in the Midwest, especially in Ohio City, you know, so.
You know, I was going to take your answer that Commissioner Boyce gave, but I think I'll tell you all that there's nothing like the leadership that you have in Columbus and Franklin County and the state of Ohio that's working on your behalf every single day. Particularly, you have Councilwoman Shayla Favor, who has literally led our housing policies literally since the time she stepped into city council. If y'all can give me a round of applause for her, she's killing it. She's killing it. You know, I have a lot of thoughts about homelessness and housing, and I want to say thank you for allowing me to be here. What I tell you is, I think every single day I step into the State House, I don't think about any other city or any other state. I think about what's happening in Ohio. And I know that every time my phone rings and a constituent says, I'm sleeping in my car, I have something to do to make sure that they are getting the type of support they need to get into a shelter, to get into some housing option. And so bold policies that are originating out of the Ohio State House is something I'm thinking about every single day. I'm gonna give you one. One of the things I'm working on looking at is how do we make sure that for foster youth who are coming out of, aging out of foster care, they have an automatic right to housing. Come on, I don't know, maybe it's just me. I just think that was a really good policy. But you know, what do I mean when I say that? Like, there are amazing ideas that I've been able to get from people like you. Folks who see on the ground every single day the lived experience. And let me tell you what's interesting about Ohio is that every single day, there's about 10,000 plus people who are likely sleeping outside across the state of Ohio. 10,000 people. That means 10,000 people who maybe families came from wealthy situations, families who are dealing with mental health and addiction issues, families who are poor and have been poor their entire life, right? And so what we're seeing is homelessness is becoming more normalized amongst all of us. And my part in the work that we're doing in the State House is stopping how do we get more people into the space. So for example, property taxes. We have a property tax study review commission. We're looking at ways to address property taxes once and for all, to the point that Commissioner Boyce brought up about regressive taxes, so that families, particularly our seniors who have paid off their mortgage, aren't losing their homes because of the lack of their ability to pay for property taxes, right? And so what we're talking about in terms of what do we compare ourselves to, I'm trying to compare Ohio to the best that it could possibly be. And I'm thinking every single day, how do we make sure that we're taking these bold, progressive, amazing policies that will touch every single family across Ohio and make it real and tangible and in law? And so the work that we're doing in the State House is not just me alone. Every single one of you in this room, from every person, even the people who don't hear me, right? You have to be a part of this process, because without you, there's no way that we can build the type of Ohio that we all deserve. And so I'm really excited to be on this journey with you and to represent you in that beautiful building down the street.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with both of the gentlemen, and I would add what sets Columbus and the region apart is the fact that we have access to our CEOs in this community, this business community, in such a way that it has been studied. This term, quote, the Columbus way, end quote, is absolutely a way in which this community has worked to address large-scale problems in our community. And so not only is there access to those folks, but they're engaged. They sit on these boards. When I think about the board that serves the Community Shelter Board itself, you've got folks that are with Huntington and Nationwide, leaders all across this community that serve not just on a CSB board, but they might be on Habitat for Humanities. They are dialed in. And I don't think that there are too many cities across the country that can say that not only do you have folks in the public sector that are working on some of the greatest issues in the community, but you got folks that are actually making some money that are also just as committed to resolving those issues as well. And I think that is something to be applauded. And then I would also say that to have a leader like a Shannon Isom, who was absolutely dedicated to ending homelessness. I said ending homelessness in our community. That's bold. That's a bold statement to say. It makes people question, well, what in the world is wrong with her? But if you don't have the courage to say what needs to be said and do what needs to be done, then you don't deserve to sit in the seats that we're sitting in, and you definitely don't deserve to lead some of the biggest nonprofits in our community. We have that here in Columbus. We have that here in Columbus. We can always be better. There's always room for improvement, right? But I'm gonna give credit to where credit is due, and we should be grateful that we have Shannon Isom in our community.
Come on, that part.
Woo.
I think there is no better note to end on, just reaffirming that it's the leadership up here on this stage, out here in this audience, that is going to make sure that we solve this. Please join me in thanking our panelists.
Okay, we're going down the home stretch. I'm going to ask Michael to join me so we can say goodbye together and end this. I will tell you that for any of you all who go to a church, I was back there doing a holy dance when I was hearing that people who run the money were saying that I was doing a good job. So, yes. Yeah. So as we end, thank you for spending some time with us. It's been a long stretch, but I don't think really long enough to talk about the complexities of homelessness. So thank you for those who are listening and also for those that stayed. I'm just going to ask Michael
What did you think? How do you feel?
You know, most days, for many of us that work in this space, I wake each day nervous and feel a sense of burden more than I do with a sense of purpose some days, because it's hard work. But I'm also very optimistic because we are not anywhere near the difficult situation of so many cities. And if we solve this issue now, it's going to be so much more cost effective, and it will serve so many people in such a better way if we can all figure out a way to say yes a lot more than we've been saying no.
Before we do our call to action, I want you to leave with a couple of things in mind. We picked I am on purpose. It is going to be something that we are committing to for the rest of this year. And as I was listening in the back and talking to Michael, and maybe many of you are connecting with, gosh, how do we solve for homelessness of the many, many people that we are helping? Maybe for you, they're called different names, but I'm going to tell you that I am resolute in this, that if they are, then I am. If they are, then I am. And so I'm going to tell you, listen, that CSB is committed to saying, I am in need of housing. I am homeless. I am parentless, and I am poor. I am a felon. I am a victim of domestic violence. I am a senior, I am frail, I am elderly. I am Black, I am Latina, I am a single male that walks the streets and rides the buses. I am human trafficked, I am a nurse. I am a student, I am a case manager, and I am homeless. I am transgender, I am LGBTQ. I am kind, I am educated. I am smart, I am employed, and I am homeless. I am not an addict. I am not mentally ill. I am homeless. I am in need of housing, and I am deserving of dignity.
As I think about the call to action, there is one that is very tactical. All of you, any of the relationships that you have where you may know developers or landlords, people who own land, and churches and faith-based organizations who are interested in and have the availability to contribute that real estate asset, please contact CSB or make that connection with CSB so they can have that connection to increase our community's response to homelessness. But there are 4 things that give me the optimism that the future of Central Ohio will be a more equitable one for all of us. One of them was just mentioned on the panel. We have a decision to make in the next month on whether or not we are going to invest in transportation equity. Because when I look at Link Us and 500 miles of sidewalks and bike lanes and bike trails and a 50% increase in bus service and the construction of 3 bus rapid transit lines by 2030, it is the first time in the 73 years since 270 was created as an idea for Columbus's future. We've been waiting for 73 years for a new idea, and that new idea is transportation equity. The other thing that has me excited is the zoning reform the city of Columbus has recently passed. 2 examples of why that zoning reform is so significant. Prior to the zone-in passage, our 140 miles of commercial corridors were only zoned for 6,000 units of housing. They're now zoned for 88,000 units of housing. And more importantly, the term SRO, single-room occupancy housing. Every American city has outlawed that zoning typology over the last decades. You can now build SRO units on all 140 miles of our commercial corridors. But that is the first step because the city has only rezoned 5% of the city. So as this zoning reform continues, we need the yes people to show up at those meetings for continued zoning reform. And the last two issues that give me optimism. One would be the city of Columbus voters have now twice approved voter-approved bonds for affordable housing. The first time in history was 2019, and then again, just 2 years ago, a $200 million bond package. The voters of Columbus are saying affordable housing and housing in general is just as important as streets and sidewalks and sewers. We need the other communities in the region to step up as well. And if you don't know the term source of income protections, under the leadership of Carly Booz, who moderated that panel, we now have source of income protection, which says all legal sources of income must be included to verify someone's eligibility for housing, alimony, child support, Social Security, disability, veterans benefits, and housing choice vouchers. Bexley, Whitehall, Westerville, Worthington, Pickerington, Gahanna, Upper Arlington, Grandview Heights, and if I didn't say Columbus, have all passed those protections. If you do not live in one of those communities, if you live in Dublin or Hilliard or Lancaster or Newark or Grove City, let's talk about building a source of income platform in those communities. Because at the end of the day, economic self-sufficiency at the urban periphery is not a sufficient defense for your isolationism. We are in this together. And with that, please stay, hang out in the lobby, let's have fellowship, more conversation, activism, and advocacy so we can build a stronger future for Central Ohio. Thank you for coming and have a great afternoon.